All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's time for our conversation right now. Professor Kingsley Moghalu is with me right here at the table. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you.
How are you? It's a long time.
Yes,
You've
quite
been
a
on
while.
the program with me.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, when you went on your political
voyage.
Yes. So will I say you're back now?
Yeah, yes,
You're
I'm
back. You're back. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get started.
Yeah.
So many things have been happening regarding the economy, at least in the last 1 year or so. Or perhaps I would say perhaps since 2016 we entered a recession.
That's
we
right.
came out of it in 2017.
Yeah.
We're witnessing a growth of 1.94%, but it's still very low. It's still a
course.
very fragile growth.
Yeah.
Why that fragility? Because perhaps if anything happens to the price of oil, would definitely go back to a recession because the government may not have so much money to get its things done. Calibrate for me where you think that we have a lot more vulnerabilities in the economy. I hope you understand what I'm saying.
Oh,
yes,
sure, I do.
Yeah.
No, I think obviously we have this certain and standard vulnerability that is fiscal. We have vulnerabilities in terms of fiscal revenues from oil. We have vulnerabilities in the debt management space because more and more our income is going to servicing debt, the interest on debt, not paying the debt. So which is very, very dangerous. And the government does not seem, the federal government does not seem to be slowing down in its interest in foreign borrowing. I think I read somewhere that they were going to the World Bank again.
For $2.5
billion.
billion.
For some more. And I just feel very sad about this because what I think is happening is an attempt to maintain an impression that a lot of work is being done by mortgaging the future of the country. I think it might be better to step back and do the more fundamental basic work of making the economy more productive and increasing the revenue base. Just look at what they've done now, increasing the VAT. I don't agree.
It's proposed, they've not increased it
Well,
yet.
yes, they have proposed it,
Yeah.
exactly. I hope they step back from that because the economy is still too fragile. People's spending power is still too low. The masses are suffering in this country. And you are making a few people who are paying tax to continue to pay more and more tax. And you know that because people's incomes are weak, you know, you're taxing them beyond what they can cope with when you increase the VAT. Now, I have proposed that the government should do a lot more work in expanding the tax base. Less than 10 million people out of 70 million economically active Nigerians are paying any income tax. Meanwhile, there are 354 taxes in Nigeria, all put together. So a few people are carrying the tax burden instead of expanding that to say 20, 30 million people paying taxes. We are just increasing taxes by increasing the VAT. So I think, you know, that's a vulnerability that could also tip us back in a recessionary place because it will make a lot of companies, their profits will be lower. And if their profits are lower because people are not buying what they're producing, then that means they will have to start cutting staff. And this is, again, a recessionary cycle. So I see a lot of vulnerability there. And I think the government needs to step back and think much more deeply about how to handle Nigeria's economy rather than short-term measures.
Now, what kind of deep thinking should come into the borrowing space? Since you have an issue with foreign borrowing, are there other options that the government can take? Because it seems now that the government may just be out of options. You're saying, okay, we shouldn't go foreign borrowing. Meanwhile, foreign borrowing is cheaper to borrow. And you're saying, oh, we shouldn't also get revenue from Nigerians. We want to increase tax. We are proposing to increase the tax rate.
We should get revenue from Nigerians, but in a different way.
How?
Expanding the tax base. Why are only 10 million people paying tax? I have recommended, I know it's difficult, but it can be done if there's political will. Why can't the federal government embark on a tax audit of Nigerians using the 140 million cell phone lines that we have in this country? That will take you to everyone. Look, the informal economy provides about 65% of Nigeria's GDP, but we know that it is in that sector that most people don't pay tax. Now, if you follow these 140 million phone lines, you will find quite a lot of them who are unemployed, and so they cannot pay you anything anyway. But you will probably find another 10, 20 million, 30 million possibly, who should be paying something, no matter how small, who are not. The reason many people don't want to pay tax is that they don't trust the government. They don't trust that their money will not be stolen by the politicians. So there is also need to address that factor of trust and confidence very clearly in a very honest communication with the Nigerian people and say, look, this is why we're doing this. We need more money to provide you with services. There has to be a social contract. So this is what I'm saying. We haven't totally run out of options, but I think what is happening is a recourse to options that are very easy, low-hanging fruit, but have very difficult consequences long-term. Whereas we could do the hard work now and have better consequences in the longer term.
Yeah, because this is very essential. Talking about the social contract or even the trust,
yes.
I think the logo of FIRS, if I'm not mistaken, is tax is what you pay, value is what you get.
Yes.
So it's a matter of, and Nigerians are actually also getting value
yes.
for what they pay. Now, where should that value come from? Because if we're taking a look at the revenue generating agencies, for example, customs on one hand,
yes.
FIRS on one hand, and all of that.
Yeah.
FIRS is a money collector.
Yes.
They give the monies to the government.
Yes.
FIRS doesn't have the powers to say this is how you should spend it. We
No.
get the money and all of that.
Yeah.
The issue of trust, which you're talking about now,
yes.
which is in a way value that Nigerians want from their leaders.
From their leaders.
From
yes.
their
it's
leaders.
a governance issue.
It's a governance issue.
Yeah.
Where should that value come from?
Yes. That value should come, one, from reducing the size of the bloated state bureaucracy, both at the federal government levels and the state levels. So it calls for political will. If you're spending billions of naira buying cars for members of the National Assembly and you're telling Nigerians that you're increasing their VAT, excuse me. You know, so that political will from the leadership has to be there to make the necessary sacrifices that will make Nigerian citizens, you know, increase their level of responsibility for your fiscal revenue. Because they're citizens and it is their responsibility to pay tax. If you go to every country in the world that works, there is no country in the world where governments are able to do what they're doing without people paying tax. So the citizens of Nigeria have also been put in a place where they have abdicated their sense of responsibility because of the corruption of the political class, because of the lack of leadership from the political class. So this needs to be re-engineered completely. And I'm not sure if the present set of leadership has the ability, the capacity, or the will to do this, because they are always putting politics first. However, they've just appointed, you know, an economic advisory council, which was one of the things that I recommended in my book, Build, Innovate, and Grow, that we should have an independent economic advisory council that advises the president. So let's see if that council, having the competence that I think they do as a team, I think they should be able to come to the heart of the matter with the president. And then the buck stops on the president's table. Let's see what he will do.
Mm. You know, there are so many facets to all of this, really, because if you like you talked about, is a governance issue.
It's a governance issue. Political
and
leadership.
the buck stops on the president's table.
Absolutely.
Because what also came to my mind is, you see that we are still making money.
Yes.
But what is the value that money is giving to us? We need also to interrogate that.
Yes, absolutely.
I was speaking with someone, was it last week? I was in his office, and he made a lot of startling things to me, which got me so disturbed.
Yeah.
That, for example, monies are being allocated for healthcare, for like pregnant women and all of that.
That's
and they're supposed to be given a certain amount of money in terms of what they're supposed to, antenatal drugs and all of that.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the people in charge inflate.
Oh, God.
The people in charge inflate, let's say there were 10 pregnant women that just put to bed this month. They will inflate it to like 50.
Yes.
And they take each money on top.
Yes, that's right.
And at the end of it, they don't even give them what they are supposed to give them at that particular price. For example, if they are supposed to give them services in around 25K, they give them like 5,000. And it goes on and on in this country, and no one is interrogating that.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, you say,
we have a very weak state.
How do we correct that? The corruption in the system, despite what the president thinks he's doing, or what the EFCC is doing?
What they're doing is they're not investing in the right areas when you're talking about fighting corruption. When you're talking about fighting corruption, you should be creating transparencies. You should be using modern technology to monitor expenditure. That's what they should be doing. For example, if you say that there is a list of the product prices of everything in the market today, and it's being monitored, on a constant basis, and anybody's awarding a contract in the government, and any contract where the pricing is above 20% or max 30% of that base price, because the contractors have to make a profit. But if it's above that, then you know there is massive corruption going on. That's not happening to the best of my knowledge. And I have said this is the sort of thing that we should be doing. Proactive. You see what I'm saying? So you don't see this. You don't see a lot of auditing going on, on a constant basis of government expenditure. Yes, we have the Auditor General of the Federation, and they're working hard, but it's too centralized. You have to have these functions diffused into every ministry, if you see what I'm saying. And every expenditure has to be constantly monitored, monitoring and evaluation. What's happening with that? What's the feedback? And what's the action that's taken based on the feedback that we get? So there isn't enough hands-on governance. People make a budget and announce it, and they think they've done their job. This is not how, in a country like this. So there's need for a rewiring about how to govern Nigeria. The government now is using methods that are antiquated. You need a modern type of governance. You need a lot of e-governance. And when we were at the central bank, that's why we began to move the financial system into mobile money, into electronic banking and all that. It's more transparent that way, rather than just people logging cash all over the place. And
so does that mean you're in support? Of course, it was even during your time, the cashless policy, during Sanusi Lamido time,
that's right.
Policy.
Yes, the cashless policy was done to promote the use of mobile and electronic means of financial transfers for transparency and for greater protection. And so there were incentives that were put in place to use those systems and disincentives from using cash. So people don't understand that it costs the central bank anything between 150 billion to 200 billion a year to manage cash in this country between the central bank and the banks. So the central bank decided that there has to be some cost to people insisting on using cash when they can use electronic means of transfers. That's where that came from. Now, whether the exact figures of the payments is too much or too little is something that can always be looked at. But if you insist on using cash, the central bank decided that you have to pay a price for it because you can use other ways and don't pay anything.
Yeah. Anyway,
you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand you, because I even had officials of the central bank where you worked yesterday, and they were telling me that, Nancy, look, for the hula baloo we're getting right now, about 500,000 and 3 million, that there are a lot of Nigerians, according to their data, that do not have that kind of money in their account. There are many Nigerians that do not have 500,000.
Of course.
So we're just talking about the few.
For the rich.
Yes.
The rich. Yes. So the people who actually pay those taxes very heavily are people who have a little bit of means. Yeah.
Now let's go back to the Economic Advisory Council, made up of 8 people.
Yes.
I think 2 women, if I'm not mistaken. 2
I think
and 6.
One woman.
One woman. Is that the Yabo woman?
Yes.
Okay, I thought there were 2.
There could be. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, but I think it's one that I saw.
The 8 people, the president's men.
Well, 7 people and a secretary of the council.
Yes, a secretary, the president's people. And the president has said, you guys have direct access to me anytime. Don't go through anyone.
Yeah.
Well, this economic, I call them on my show, on this show, was it on Tuesday? I don't know, on Wednesday, I called them the SWAT team.
Okay.
I watched one series called SWAT. You know, yes, they come in the US, they come in when things are, you know, have gone so awry and all of that. Do you think that this team will save Nigeria?
Saving Nigeria is a big title and a big ask. Now, remember, it's an advisory team. It's not an execution team. So, but advice matters. You know, if you give the right kind of advice and the person you're giving the advice to listens to you, then it can have an impact. So I think it's an important development. The economic management team concept was not working. In the past 4 years of this administration, the economy has been horrible and still is. So that should tell you that however, whatever was the system they were using to manage the economy, not just the economic management team, but also what I called an excessive reliance on the central bank. You know, they've turned the central bank into something else. You know, everything is central bank, this intervention, trying to use, you know, forex policy to replace trade policy, things that should be trade policy. So the central bank is doing too much. There's too much reliance on it. They have this intervention, that intervention, all these things at the end of the day are not going to solve the problem. The problem is more fundamental. We have to make this a productive economy. So this council should be able to advise the president on the structural reforms that need to happen in the Nigerian economy to set our economy free. Number one of which is that the fuel subsidy, the petrol subsidy, must go. Spending over ₦1 trillion every year on this scam. The president himself called it a scam when he was campaigning. Then he came in and kept it. So there's a lot of contradictions, you know, in the Nigerian system. And it's all calculated based on we're using 16 million liters of petrol a day. Is that the calculation? It's nothing near that. It's not more than 35 million what's being used. So there's a lot of fraud built into this system. Why can't the government grab the bull by the horns, work out a program that will ameliorate the impact, immediate impact on poor people, for example? You can buy petrol. I was at a summit, a workshop yesterday, and a colleague said, look, why can't people just buy petrol at the normal pump price? And if you are of a certain income and you can prove it, you get a rebate. You see what I'm saying? But everybody's buying petrol at the same price. If you do that and you deregulate the downstream petroleum market where anybody can import and sell, after some time the price of petrol will crash. This is what happened to the SIM card. There was a time it was 40,000 naira to get a SIM card. Today, what is it in Nigeria? So sometimes the fear of market forces, but for political reasons. Meanwhile, you are not helping the poor that you claim to be defending. You are making them more and more poor. So I expect the council to go into some of these very serious issues of where can we raise more money from without mortgaging our future, fiscal issues, you know, structural reforms. What is the economic philosophy of the Nigerian state? Can we get it very clear exactly so that our policy making can be consistent? Not today this government will come and do this, tomorrow this government will come and do this. The problem with the economic management of the Buhari government is that I see the president having statist instincts.
Anti-market?
Not
anti-free market?
Anti-free market, yes. I don't see enough appreciation of the role of the market forces. Now, I don't
so
believe...
perhaps it's socialist in nature?
It could be, but socialism, how many people in the world are socialists today? How many countries are socialist?
Like the Cubas, the Fidel Castro.
Maybe 3 or 4, you can still count them, but every country in the world is a market economy of some degree or the other. So I'm not saying that market forces are, you know, entirely wonderful. Yeah. No, the government has a role. But the role is to create an enabling environment and then to regulate the market efficiently and effectively. That's what it is. It is not for the government to try to become the market, setting prices. It doesn't work. This government itself raised fuel prices when they came into office. So President Buhari has had a number of opportunities to use the political capital that he has to actually move this economy forward in a fundamental direction. But each time you see that there's some kind of fear, you know, about maybe the political consequences, but it's because the government is not able to communicate to the people. If you tell the people why certain things have to happen and carry them along with you, to use the Nigerian language, and, you know, you structure things well, there could be some serious changes. So I think it's an exaggeration to say that the council will save Nigeria. The person whose responsibility is to save Nigeria is the person we elected to save it. You see what I'm saying? And that is the president and his government. But I think the council will provide him with good advice, and then we will have to see whether they take that advice or whether they dodge the advice for political reasons or whether there are vested interests that counter the advice. These things are all realities in our lives.
Now, are you of the school of thought that perhaps the president has an EAC now? You shouldn't, or he should also have EMT, Economic Management Team, made up of the ministers, the central bank governor, and all of that, in terms of operational.
Operational.
Yes,
now,
because the council is just a council to advise.
Yeah,
they don't have the capacity to do, and they are guys outside the government. They are not within the government space.
Sure.
So we will operationalize it.
The appointment of an Economic Advisory Council does not rob all the institutions of government of their function, which is to continue to run the economy, like the central bank or the Ministry of Finance or national planning. Nobody takes away their job from them. The idea, but the problem was that these were the people called the economic management team, and they were the ones to both advise, conceptualize, and operationalize. It is impossible. Now, in the era of Obasanjo, when this idea came of the economic management team, it worked. One, because the capacity was there in the team. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was leading it.
It was a mixture of both public and private sector.
Well, more so when President Jonathan came, and then a lot of the private sector came
Dangote and Co.
Yes,
were all
that's
part
fine.
of it.
But I don't think that the private sector should be in that team. I think it's a problem. I think, yes.
I understand where you're coming from.
For obvious reasons.
Yes, I do.
So there has to be an interface between the government and the private sector. And I have recommended the creation of a State Business Relations Council, where the government and the organized private sector sit down and discuss the government's policies and how they can create an enabling environment for business and investment. That's the relationship that shows. It's not for the private sector to come and be making economic policy, because many people there will be making it with an eye on, you know, how can I profit from them? You know, it's normal. You know, so what in most governments, what happens is that you bring a team of economic experts to actually create economic policy. And that's what this team should do. And when they advise the president, if the president buys their advice, then he should direct the operational part of his government, that is the ministries, based on that decision. So I think it's a good move that the president has made to appoint this council. I am of that view. And I know that there will be some feathers ruffled and all that. But you see, at the end of the day, as I say, who is responsible for the Nigerian economy? The president. We elected him to manage our affairs. So if it succeeds or it fails, it is him we know. So you cannot say it is the job of the vice president. No. The vice president is operating on delegated authority. And delegated authority can be withdrawn or rearranged if necessary. But the vice president has a constitutional role as chairman of the National Economic Council. And that you cannot take away, and that's okay. So they have to find a way to coordinate between the work of the advisory council, the work of the ministers, and the role of the council. It's a coordination issue, and I think it can be sorted out. But the principal task of serious economic thinking, nobody was doing it, because the competent people qualified to do it were simply not anywhere to be seen and empowered. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
So that is why this move is a good move. So that's my view about it.
Now, we are not in doubt that they have the capacity to advise.
Yes.
And I think I asked my guests yesterday and 2 days ago the same question, and I want to ask you the same.
Yeah.
There's a capacity to advise. There's a capacity to do what has been advised also.
Exactly.
But will the structure of the Nigerian economy support the capacity to do?
Yes.
I hope you understand. Prof, you
I
understand?
get where you're going.
Thank you.
I get where you're going.
So even if Doyin Salami's team advised the president, there's capacity to do.
Yes.
But the structure which we are operating now, will it support that capacity to do? Or we still go back?
Yeah.
That means the foundation is...
So you have come to the issue.
Thank you.
And it comes back to the man we elected. And I always say it, I don't believe in passing the buck. The president cannot pass the buck to anybody. If his government has failed, he has failed. So it is now up to the president to align. Having done this, he should not go to sleep. He should now think ahead. What do we now do? If these guys give me a certain type of advice, how do we position ourselves to actually, as a transmission mechanism of this advice into the Nigerian economy through government policy? So how do we make sure that that happens? I think there are questions about that, given the track record that we have seen. But I don't think that capacity is also totally absent. It is a matter of the will of the president, if you see what I'm saying.
Political will.
Political will. You know,
so you're just opposing economic ideas could be wonderful, but the political will to get it done.
Because a lot of economic ideas affect vested interests. That's the issue. If you say that you want to manage the Nigerian currency, the naira, in such a way that it comes closer to the real market value, it's good for the economy overall, but there are people who may be getting access to those forex at subsidized rates. They may be powerful people. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
And they may press buttons to make sure that you don't go that way. So this is Nigeria, and it's now a matter of political will as to whether the president wants to work for the masses or he wants to allow a small group of people to tell him that this advice is against the masses because really it is against their interest. You see, there's a way you frame things, and it may look to a president as, oh, the people will suffer. But perhaps the people who are telling you that have a vested interest, and they are the ones who will suffer, but they will not come and tell the president, my business will suffer. No, they will frame it in such a way that the president says, oh, hey, can we tax the Nigerian people like, do you see what I'm saying? So it's up to the president to see through. And I think that this council will address that issue.
Now, let's, Prof, we just have a minute to the end of the show. It's, you know, it's always nice speaking with you. We can do a show another time. But one last question.
Sure.
This EAC, the Economic Advisory Council, because we're also saying that they have capacity to advise, they have capacity to advise. What do you expect from? Because I'm also seeing the Doyin Salami team sitting down and less of the technical macroeconomic discussion. I understand it should come, but should they also come up with advice that should affect the quality of lives of Nigerian people? I hope you understand what I'm saying.
Let me tell you,
because I think you've been...
I have been saying this. I don't want the Economic Advisory Council to just go in and be discussing macro economy and, you know, just GDP. You know,
Thank you. You just got, yes, that's what I meant.
No. Over almost 100 million Nigerians live in extreme poverty. That is the real issue. And so there are three things that people don't understand. You have economic growth, you have economic development, which is human development, the quality of life, and then you have economic transformation. That is the structural transformation, moving away from depending on oil and diversifying the economy beyond oil and agriculture. These are the three tasks. How do you make economic growth inclusive? How do you affect the quality of lives of Nigerians in terms of healthcare? But to do that, I think that the Buhari administration needs to open up the economy a lot more so that revenues can be generated for the government to enable the government to take care of the poor. You cannot start with a social investment program or these kinds of ideas when you don't have any fiscal revenue.
Because we have about 46 sectors of the Nigerian economy divided among the primary, secondary, and tertiary. You have the agri, all my mining, light manufacturing, and services for the tertiary.
That's right.
But it seems like it's only 4 sectors out of those 46 that are giving us the amount of money which we have now. So is it a tough job for the EAC, or is it a tough job, or is it a tougher job for Mr. President?
I think it's a tough job for Mr. President. But the EFC has to, the EAC, I'm sorry, has to just point him. The EAC, in making recommendations to him, should make recommendations to him about what he ought to do.
Okay.
They shouldn't just give him an economic analysis. That's not fair. Mr. President is not an economist.
He doesn't even want those technicalities right now.
Yeah. So it is to tell him, this is what we advise. This is why we advise it. This is the consequence of what that we will have if you do it, and this is what we recommend you do.
Prof, thank you for joining me
You're
again.
welcome.
We'll do this sometime. Very soon.
No question.
Very, very, very soon, because there are so many questions to be answered.
Absolutely.
All right, I've been speaking with Professor Kingsley Moghalu, a former deputy governor at the Central Bank of Nigeria and a former presidential candidate. You heard him say here, he's back. So it's good to be back. It's good to have you back. You know, the economist hat, not the politician hat.
Yes,
now,
absolutely.
perhaps when you come back again, I'll be asking you what journey or what your journey was like. Or your,
but you
your
know
voyage.
that journey had a lot to do with the economy.
Economy, yeah.
Because
Yes, I know that's
I
why
had a vision for the economy and how to make Nigeria a wealthy and prosperous country. And that was what I wanted to share with my countrymen and women.
But you can still do it even outside government.
Oh, yes,
Still
of course.
share. All right.
Yeah.
All right, that's the much we can take on.